Around 1200 BC, the world did not collapse in a single day. There was no final battle that everyone remembered, no declaration, no moment when kings gathered to announce the end of an era. Instead, the world unraveled in fragments, one failure at a time. Empires stopped answering letters. Ships failed to arrive. Trade routes that had functioned for centuries went silent. Cities burned, not after glorious sieges, but through abandonment and chaos. Kings disappeared from history not because they were conquered, but because the systems that kept them alive stopped working. For generations, the Eastern Mediterranean had been held together by bronze. Bronze weapons, bronze tools, bronze armor, entire civilizations depended on it. Copper came from one region, tin from another. Grain, timber, horses, and slaves moved along long, fragile routes. Armies marched because supply lines existed. Cities thrived because ships arrived on time. And then those routes broke. At first, no one understood why. Harvests failed, droughts weakened food supplies, earthquakes shattered walls that had stood for centuries. Rebellions erupted inside kingdoms already stretched thin. Each problem fed the next. The system began to eat itself. Cities like Mycenae burned. Palaces across the Aegean collapsed. The great stone walls that once symbolized power were breached and abandoned. The Mycenaean warrior elite did not die in heroic last stands. They disappeared through starvation, desertion, and internal revolt. What had once been a connected world fractured into isolated villages almost overnight. Further east, the Hittite Empire collapsed with terrifying speed. This was not a minor kingdom. The Hittites had rivaled Egypt for control of the Near East. They commanded standing armies, enforced treaties, and ruled from fortified capitals. And then, suddenly, they were gone. Their capital, Hattusa, was destroyed and never rebuilt. Garrisons vanished, roads emptied. The empire did not retreat. It dissolved. Along the coast, cities like Ugarit experienced the collapse in real time. Letters written in panic have been found, pleading for military assistance as enemy ships were already visible on the horizon. One message speaks of fleets approaching the harbor. Another asks why allies have gone silent. No answer ever came. The city burned while its rulers were still waiting for help. In Cyprus, copper production halted. Mines were abandoned. Smelting centers went cold. Without copper, bronze could not be made. Without bronze, weapons could not be replaced. The backbone of the entire military system snapped. Across the Levant, fortified towns were overwhelmed. Some fell to direct assault. Others emptied as populations fled inland. Fields went untended. Irrigation systems collapsed. Hunger finished what violence began. These civilizations were not defeated in clean battles. They were smothered. One by one, the lights went out. By the time Egypt understood what was happening, every other great power was already gone. Mycenae was burning. The Hittites had disappeared. Ugarit had fallen silent. Egypt was not preparing for a war. It was preparing to be the last one left. And then, from the sea, they came. They were not a single people, not a unified army, not a kingdom with banners and kings. They arrived in waves, scattered but relentless. Different languages, different weapons, different faces, but all moving from the same direction: the sea. Later, historians would call them the SeaPeoples. At the time, no one knew who they were, only that they were coming. And they were not just raiding. They were moving. Families came with them. Wagons rolled behind warriors. Livestock was driven ashore. This was not a hit-and-run invasion. This was migration under pressure. A population on the move because the old world could no longer sustain it. They struck the coast first. Ports were attacked without warning. Ships were seized at anchor. Harbors burned. Warehouses filled with grain and bronze were looted or destroyed. Once the ports fell, inland cities began to starve. Without trade, bronze weapons could not be replaced. Without bronze, armies lost their edge. Without armies, kings lost control. One city fell, then another. Civilization did not collapse because of a single enemy. It collapsed because it was too interconnected to survive disruption. As the Sea Peoples pushed deeper into the eastern Mediterranean, they encountered little organized resistance. Most states were already exhausted. Garrisons were undermanned. Borders existed only on maps. Refugees clogged roads, carrying news of destruction faster than any messenger. By the time the Sea Peoples reached Egypt's sphere of influence, the world around the Nile was already in ruins. Egypt still stood. The Nile continued to flood. The fields still produced grain. Central authority still existed. In a collapsing world, Egypt was one of the last places where food, order, and power remained. That made it a target. The Sea Peoples did not attack Egypt all at once. They tested it. Small raids, coastal probes, strikes against weak points. They came by land through the Levant and by sea along the delta. Egyptian reliefs show ships packed with warriors, horned helmets, round shields, long slashing swords designed for brutal close combat. These were not the weapons of chariot elites or aristocratic armies. They were weapons built for chaos. Egypt understood the danger. If these populations were allowed to settle, Egypt would not fall in a single battle. It would collapse slowly, the same way the others had, from the edges inward. So Egypt changed. Chariot warfare was no longer enough. The Nile Delta was fortified. River mouths were blocked. Watchtowers rose along the coast. Archers were positioned not for parade ground battles, but for killing at close range. Egypt prepared for naval combat, something it had rarely emphasized before. When the Sea Peoples finally launched a major assault, they did not face a ceremonial army defending tradition. They faced a state fighting for survival. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Ships collided in narrow waters. Boarding hooks tore vessels together. Archers fired from the shore into crowded decks where warriors had nowhere to run. Men fell into the water weighed down by armor, dragged under by their own equipment. There were no heroic charges, no clean formations, only controlled violence. The Nile Delta became a killing ground. Egypt survived. But survival was not victory. The world Egypt emerged into was smaller, harsher, and poorer. Trade networks were gone. Diplomatic correspondence ended. Writing systems disappeared across entire regions. Literacy collapsed. Stone cities were abandoned and replaced by villages. Bronze lost its meaning, not because iron was superior, but because the supply chains that made bronze possible were dead. Egypt hardened. Borders tightened. Movement was restricted. Refugees were controlled instead of welcomed. The openness that once fueled prosperity was replaced by suspicion. Egypt did not conquer the New World. It endured it. The Sea Peoples did not vanish after Egypt resisted them. Some settled along the coast. Some merged into local populations. Some disappeared into history, leaving only fragments of names carved into stone. They were not the cause of the collapse. They were its symptom. They were what happened when drought, famine, rebellion, and systemic failure forced entire populations to move. The Bronze Age did not end in fire. It ended in silence. Letters stopped. Ships stopped sailing. Kings stopped ruling. Systems stopped functioning. Highly connected worlds are powerful, but they are fragile. When one link breaks, every other link feels it. Egypt survived not because it was stronger than everyone else, but because it changed just enough, just in time. Others did not. Civilizations did not fall screaming. They stopped working, and the world moved on without them. We have reached the end of another journey, through the dusty pages of history, but the whispers of the past never cease. Subscribe to stay with us on this mysterious voyage.